3 weeks ago, the Canadian border became the silent battlefield for a corporate vulnerability General Motors never wanted the world to see. This wasn't a trade war, a recall, or a typical labor dispute. This was a targeted surgical strike that revealed the deep, structural weakness binding the world's most powerful auto conglomerate to its northern neighbor. The financial and psychological fallout is now radiating across Detroit, exposing a core flaw in the global automotive supply chain that is more critical than any politician or CEO is currently admitting. The core question is simple. How did an isolated industrial action in a single foreign country suddenly threaten the entire North American production engine? The answer lies in what economists call the just-in-time JIT paradox. JIT inventory management is the bedrock of modern manufacturing efficiency, saving billions by eliminating stockpiles. But its true function is not just about saving space, it's a high-stakes corporate confidence game. Every part arrives precisely when needed, minimizing capital tied up in inventory. However, this hyper-efficiency turns any point of friction, a single plant, a crucial part, into an economic choke point. Canada's workers didn't just shut down a factory, they pulled a specific proprietary component out of the JIT flow, instantly creating an economic cardiac arrest for production lines across the US and Mexico. The surprise wasn't the slowdown, but the speed of the failure. Within 72 hours, hundreds of miles away, assembly lines in multiple states began to stall. This instant paralysis wasn't normal. The mechanism exposed was the sheer, unforeseen concentration of proprietary parts production in a handful of Canadian facilities, a historical, almost accidental over-reliance GM quietly built up over decades. This fact reveals a deeper truth. In the race for quarterly profits, the theoretical risk of catastrophic dependency was sidelined for the guaranteed benefit of immediate cost reduction. This corporate strategy, now visible to competitors and markets globally, is the real bombshell. For the average worker or consumer, this is the clearest lesson yet on the behavioral economics of supply. Scarcity is immediate, recovery is slow. When the JIT chain breaks, the impact is not linear, it is exponential. What starts as a localized issue in one community becomes a job security concern in another, and a price inflation risk for the consumer waiting for a new truck. This single event demonstrated that the perceived stability of a $100 billion corporation is anchored by an alarmingly small number of highly specialized, often politically or geographically vulnerable nodes. Detroit may be reeling from the stock price drop and the production hit, but the true cost is the strategic information now in the open. General Motors' key vulnerability, the geographic and product-level concentration of its most critical components, has been laid bare for all global competitors to analyze. But why would a sophisticated conglomerate allow this dependency to concentrate so intensely in a high-cost environment like Canada? The answer is tied to a historical policy move that completely redefined their operating philosophy. The panic in Detroit wasn't just about missing trucks. It was about the sudden and catastrophic breach of the fundamental organizational principle that underpins a modern superpower corporation: operational redundancy. Every executive lives by the law that no single supplier or plant should ever have the power to halt the global enterprise. Yet the Canadian strike proved this doctrine was a fiction. The weakness isn't in the assembly line, it's in the institutional psychology of prioritizing legacy relationships over pure risk modeling. The system hidden behind this news is the sunk cost fallacy applied to geopolitics. For decades, GM maintained a robust footprint in Canada, driven by a confluence of favorable legacy agreements, a highly skilled unionized workforce, and favorable policy environments established through early trade pacts. Moving a critical, specialized plant, which required hundreds of millions in dedicated tooling and proprietary knowledge, is not just a logistical hurdle, it is a declaration of corporate retreat. The institutional decision was to continue investing in the existing centralized Canadian facility, allowing the dependency to deepen rather than absorb the massive, multi-year expense required to dual-source that proprietary part in a different location. They chose the short-term saving over the long-term geopolitical firewall. Here is the surprising fact. The component that caused the collapse was not cheaper to produce in Canada. The continued reliance was driven by a complex calculation involving specialized union contracts that guaranteed a specific quality and institutional knowledge that took decades to build. The unexpected mechanism wasn't about cheap labor, it was about untransferable human capital. The knowledge and tooling for this specific part were so intertwined with the Canadian workforce that attempting to replicate the entire process quickly elsewhere proved technically and economically non-viable. This realization escalates the tension. The risk was never solely labor-related. It was a deeply embedded knowledge transfer risk that executives had failed to quantify. For everyone watching, this defines the stakes of the new economy. This is the difference between efficiency and resilience. In the behavioral economic model, corporations are constantly making a trade-off between the certain daily benefits of high efficiency, more profit now, and the uncertain black swan risk of low resilience, catastrophic failure later. The Canadian incident is the catastrophic event that proves the latter was undervalued. It confirms that the system is fundamentally brittle, and that global corporate stability rests on the good faith and uninterrupted work of highly concentrated, highly specialized groups of workers. The immediate crisis may fade, but the secret of GM's concentration risk is now a permanent fixture in competitor war rooms worldwide. This sets the stage for a dramatic policy shift as governments and rivals analyze the fragility of North American manufacturing. But here's the part nobody expected: the quiet move Canada made in its negotiation, not against GM, but against a completely different global power structure. The world did not merely observe this failure, it catalogued it. From Tokyo to Munich, and especially Beijing, corporate strategy teams are running real-time simulations based on the precise mechanics of the Canadian strike. This event is not just a localized industrial dispute, it's a global case study in asymmetric economic leverage, the ability of a smaller entity to cause disproportionate harm to a much larger one through control of a critical bottleneck. The historical parallel here is inescapable: the geopolitical leverage of bottleneck control. The 1973 OPEC oil embargo demonstrated the power of concentrated natural resources. The 2011 Japanese earthquake demonstrated the fragility of concentrated technological production. The Canadian incident demonstrates the volatility of concentrated specialized human capital. In a world focused on rare earth minerals and microchip factories, Canada revealed a different, equally potent commodity: the proprietary, single-source manufacturing capability that is too expensive and complex to duplicate quickly. The policy-level system exposed is the tacit acceptance by large economies that a handful of strategic components are manufactured beyond their direct legal control. The behavioral insight here is the herd immunity failure in a market context. Just as a small reduction in vaccination rates can lead to a massive outbreak, a minor reduction in supply chain redundancy, the corporate vaccination, allows an otherwise contained disruption to become a systemic crisis. The surprising connection is that this corporate weakness is structurally mirrored by a national security risk. When a trade partner like Canada controls the proprietary choke point, the U.S. government cannot simply command production to restart. It must rely on diplomatic pressure and corporate negotiation. This transfer of control, from the state to the trade partner's labor policy, is the quiet geopolitical shift now being analyzed. This matters to regular families because it defines the new economic reality. Stability is a premium cost. Every corporation will now begin the painful, multi-year, multi-billion-dollar process of de-risking and dual-sourcing these choke point components. This process is highly inflationary, as the costs of maintaining two factories instead of one will inevitably be passed on to the consumer. The Canadian move, therefore, has effectively initiated a permanent structural change in the price of North American-built automobiles, a quiet tax on consumption necessitated by years of underquantified corporate risk. The Detroit establishment is now scrambling to ensure this dependency is never exploited again. But the global markets are not just looking at GM. They are looking at how this incident confirms the viability of a similar strategy across every concentrated global industry, from aerospace to pharmaceuticals. It gets deeper because while the media focuses on the lost production, the real impact is a complete overhaul of America's manufacturing defense structure. The real-world impact is not measured in dollars lost on a stock chart. It is measured in the lost hours of wages, the delayed investment decisions, and the sudden, acute awareness of vulnerability felt by every mid-level manager in North America. This event is a clear, visceral demonstration that in the globalized supply system, local decisions have immediate planetary consequences. The cascading effects on jobs and local economies reveal the true cost of corporate optimization. The part the media isn't discussing is the psychological recontracting happening across the labor market. For decades, workers were told that their jobs were at risk due to globalization and automation. The Canadian strike proved the opposite, that specialized, geographically concentrated labor is, in fact, the most powerful and strategic asset in the entire capitalist structure. It shifted the balance of power, demonstrating that the workers controlling the proprietary choke point have disproportionate leverage that far exceeds their raw numbers. This reframing of labor as a strategic national asset is the most profound long-term consequence of the entire event. The pattern interrupt that will define the next decade is the inevitable political and corporate move toward managed decoupling, not from China, but from dependency itself. Politicians on both sides of the border will now be forced to introduce policies that mandate or incentivize dual sourcing and regional redundancy for all critical components. This is not about protectionism, it's about state-enforced resilience. The historical parallel is the post-Cold War era, where governments began demanding guaranteed domestic production capacity for strategic goods. The Canadian strike is the geopolitical justification for a new, expensive era of domestic fortress manufacturing. What this means for families is a permanent acceleration of price increases. The cost of de-risking the supply chain, the insurance premium on stability, will be embedded in every product. The average market participant needs to understand that the era of ultra-cheap, ultra-efficient global production is ending. We are shifting to an era where the system is intentionally designed with redundancy, which is, by definition, an intentional inefficiency. That added cost is the true price of the vulnerability Canada just exposed. The lesson from this Detroit crisis is clear. Corporate structure is not a matter of finance. It is a matter of national security. General Motors and its global rivals must now rebuild their entire supply architecture with the assumption that every point of concentration is a point of attack. Because while the world is focused on the immediate supply chain breakdown and the new cost of automobiles, the real transformation is already unfolding, quietly and in a place no one is expecting. The global energy grid is now showing the exact same catastrophic vulnerability.